Welcome, Paul, to the SalesChange Podcast. So you work for Intergage. Tell me a bit about Intergage.
Well, thanks, Matt. Intergage is a digital marketing business. It basically does three things. We produce websites, we do digital marketing, and we're also expert in marketing automation. And we're a platinum reseller for HubSpot, and we're developing our own software in that field as well.
How long have Intergage been going?
20 years.
And you've been there the full 20 years?
Not quite. The first 2 years were really my brother in a shed. Yeah. And but when he emerged, blinking into the sunlight and said, look, I've created something to sell, that was in February 2003, he needed somebody to go and sell it, and I was that person. So I joined as sales director initially and became managing director in the year 2006, 2007.
So it's kind of like Apple in the sense that you created something in the garage and then moved, and now you're flying. So how many people have you got working for you now?
Nearly 30.
And how has that growing process gone from you and your brother to?
Well, it's funny. We've had to reinvent ourselves several times because when my brother did emerge blinking into the sunlight, he had written a software product. So initially we were a software company, and our software was software that you would use to online software, so software as a service, if you like, that you would use to build, manage, and market a website, a content management system, and it was well ahead of its time. So
think that mic's dropping.
Is it? Oh, yes, it is, isn't it? Yeah. So we'll start that again, shall we? Yeah.
Just tighten that up. I can just see it in the corner of my eye, just going down. There you go. Sorry, is that?
So I was going to get. I'm going to have that going, reversing back through a tunnel experience on the sound.
So
sorry, go on.
It was. So you've grown from just you and your brother to 30 people.
Yeah.
How has that growing process gone?
Well, we had to introduce. Let me start again. We had to reinvent ourselves several times along the way because we started as a software business. In the year 2006, 2007, the software we'd created, a content management system that allowed ordinary mortals to build, manage, and market a website, really had started widely to become available as open source. So, the very thing that we'd spent our entire life and business building was now free of charge, which was a bit of a disaster.
So the value that you had was now minimal.
Yeah, well, a lot of people didn't see a value in buying our software when they could get free software, like WordPress and Drupal and Joomla, that did exactly that. So, that was a bit left field, but we reinvented ourselves a couple of times along the way. We grew to, at one point, having 50 people. The business had 2 offices, 50 people, and it kind of started to develop 2 different cultures. So we had an office in Hampshire and another one in Dorset, and there was definitely starting to appear a sort of them and us culture, and we didn't really need 2 offices. So we decided to go back to having one office where we could have one culture.
Yeah. And what is that culture?
Well, that culture, that's an interesting one. We've been working really, really hard on our values. And so the first value that we all hold is courageous honesty. And it's about having the balls to tell the truth even when it's difficult. And that's not only to customers but to each other. And so one of the things we've been working on is we worked with an external trainer to develop a training course for all our staff that we did a couple of months ago internally to talk about how courageous honesty was really important. And whenever I raise the subject, I get some interesting feedback. But this really, really important.
So is that from the bottom all the way to the top? Honesty throughout the...
Yeah, completely.
Yeah. So do you hear from people? Have you got an open door policy? Is what I'm trying to say. Do you hear from people from the bottom all the way to the top?
Well, you know what? Having an open door policy, yes, I do. But is that enough? Absolutely not. So what I've decided to do, and I'm implementing now, and it's been very revealing, is to take 15 minutes out with each person and ask them 4 questions. And the 4 questions go like this. It's coffee with the boss is what it's called. It's 15-minute informal coffee with the boss.
I like this. Yeah.
And so everybody in the company gets to spend 15 minutes with me every quarter, whether they like it or not. Yep. Most of them appear to like it. And sometimes they will go on for longer than 15 minutes because the people have got a lot to say sometimes. But it's about being proactive and saying, well, firstly, how happy are you on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is ecstatic? Yeah. And to be fair, we get between 8 and 10 is the usual response. I had 110 this morning, which is lovely. And then I'll ask them what's working well at Intergage and what we need to improve. And then the really big one, which is what do I need to know that I probably don't want to hear? And that's quite revealing.
It's a game changer.
Yeah, it is, because given that I remind them that our number one value is courageous honesty, but at the same time, I will end that with their questions, which is exactly the same thing. You can ask me any question you like, and I promise that I will look you in the eye and tell you the truth. And so, apart from the what does he or she earn? That's the only thing. That's the only thing that is private. But even then, I would.
So has that proved to be a success?
Yeah. I'd say it has. I mean, I'm filling up my notebooks with feedback that I wouldn't otherwise have got.
Yeah. So you use it as a constant evolving process to keep continually evolve Intergage and make sure that you stay relevant.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's really important. If you're trying to build a magnetic company, then the things that you do to become magnetic probably are very similar, whether you want to become magnetic to talent and retain the great talent that you've got and attract new talent, or whether you want to attract customers. They have to be able to perceive that there's actually something different and special about this business, and that if you're going to keep them, then there have to be great reasons.
What is that special thing about Intergage, do you think?
What do I think it is? I think it is our transparency. And the fact that we're constantly evolving. We do several things which I think are unique. We have a 10% learning time in the business, so that 1 hour in every 10 that people get paid for is to learn. And so if you're an eternal student, then it's a great place to be, because not all businesses allow you to do that.
And I think it's really important if you're a leader to take time out yourself to learn, and if you engender that, because I've got a couple of sales guys now, and one of their appraisal tasks this year, because I run annual appraisals, one of their appraisal tasks is nothing to do with the business, but it's just to read 3 books. And I want to know what those books are about, so they can't just go onto the internet and take the back page and tell me that this is the bases of what the book's about. But I want to know what they got out of it, what values they got out of it. And it's really interesting to find out which books they've read, which is one of the SalesChange 5 questions, which we'll ask at the end of this podcast. But it's really interesting to find out from my staff which books they're reading, because then I can understand sort of how their role is formed from the different experiences that they bring in. Because I read all the time, and I've got 5 or 6 books on the go, and I dip into one and dip into another, and it's completely. It depends on which mood I'm in and which book that I pick up. But I think it's massively important to continually learn. I
couldn't agree more. All the most interesting people that I know are big readers.
Yeah.
And there is so much great thinking out there to be absorbed. And I would, when I was at school, I was a very reluctant student. But since I discovered sales and marketing, I've been an eternal student, really. And like you, I'm constantly dipping into other books. But I always have audiobooks on the go.
Yeah.
And,
that. And podcasts.
And podcasts, of course, yeah.
Yes.
And that is relatively recent. Since podcast became, for me, when podcast became available on Spotify, it was a bit of a game changer, really. Because not being an Apple user, this was the most convenient way.
I'm an Apple man through and through. Watch, phone, iPad. Yeah, I've got the lot.
Yeah, I'm kind of an Android guy.
What's more important, sales or marketing? Well,
in its true definition, sales is part of marketing.
Yeah.
And because if you look at the Chartered Institute of Marketing definition, which I still think is a bit crap, really, it's and forgive me if I don't get a word perfect, but it's something like the management process responsible for identifying, anticipating, and meeting customer needs at a profit. Now, satisfying, I think, is the word they use, customer needs at a profit. And I think the word satisfying is a bit lame.
Yeah, it could be fulfilling.
Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah, it could be, or it could be for delighting customers at profit, because I think we live in a connected world, and I think that in a world where all you do is satisfy customer needs, that kind of leaves customers feeling a bit meh. Really. And I think that in a connected world, the one we live in now, then I think it's all about delighting customers to get them talking.
You didn't answer the question, though.
I'd re-ask the question. Sorry, mate.
Sales or marketing?
Well, marketing is more important because sales is a part of marketing.
I think, yes, I agree. But I think, they are one and the same, in the sense that even within sales, you have to market your brand. And within marketing, you're basically setting up the sales process.
Yeah.
So they are one and the same, but I could probably sell if I didn't have the marketing, but it would take some of my own marketing to generate that interest.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't argue that And corporately, they're seen as two separate things.
Yeah.
And once upon a time, as a salesperson, then I used to pride myself on exactly that. All I needed was a telephone and a business card. So that was the extent of marketing that I needed. And then I could make money for my company. I think that today, in a lot of businesses, it's not quite that simple.
No, there are a multitude of tools available. I mean, I do social media videos. You market yourself in terms of a personal brand on LinkedIn. You've got your website. You've got literature, exhibitions. There's 101 things you can do for marketing. But ultimately, it does come down to the person you are and your own personal brand, so that people buy from people. So, which I find when I look at Intergage's website, and we're in the process of working with you at the moment, but you get to buy into the people that you're working with, and relationships are everything when it comes to the sales process.
Yeah. Well, I can't argue with people. Buy from people. If you don't trust me, you'll never buy from me.
Exactly. Yeah. Do you have clients that don't appreciate the creative process?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think not all people do appreciate the creative process. The process of finding the right picture, for example, there'll be many people who will say, well, how can that possibly take 2 or 3 hours? Well, have you ever tried to find the right picture, get a short list of images that would be the single biggest wow factor that you want to put on a homepage, for example, or create that image from scratch? It's something that can take an awful long time.
So within your team, do you have specific people that you would go to in order to do that? I mean, the follow-up question to this would be, is youth better than experience? Is there a creative mind from a young age? The question I've got here is, do you think youth is important for innovation, or can experience be just as valuable?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I think they both have a part to play. And I think that where we are right now, we're in a business world where we have different generations that look at problems with different perspectives. And, where we look at the baby boomers, those people who look at technology in almost slightly aghast, whereas we have the sort of Generation X's, those people that have grown up with the landscape that was the old school landscape in the beginning, and that has morphed to a digital landscape halfway through.
I'm probably in the Generation X, yeah.
Yeah, and then you've got the sort of the millennials, if you like, who have been born digital. And then you've got a new generation coming through with a slightly different perspective than, Generation Z. Then I think you've got all of these different perspectives to look at problems from. And I think that, to answer your question, in terms of creativity is really problem solving and using imagination to solve problems. And so I think that there is no one generation has the monopoly on that. But I think what we need to do is we need to collaborate, and we need to, the older people need to explain the business problem for the younger people to engage with that very often, because the one thing experience brings is a way of reframing problems, because you've looked at them from many different perspectives. If you can help perhaps the youth to reframe some of the problems, then that's great. But also, just, there is a degree of reverse mentoring. So it is really important that the young people teach the older people what technology is really capable of in order to help them solve problems.
I mean, my son now, he's 13, and he already understands views on TikTok and trying to build. He understands that his generation understand that in order to generate interest in himself, he's got to generate views and he's got to generate likes, which is all to do with social media marketing. When I grew up, I didn't have Facebook, didn't have Instagram. There was none of that social media marketing, and it was just the formation of websites and understanding Google AdWords and to try and generate interest that way. My mum and dad would have worked in the 1980s with a mobile phone and gone to a phone bank in order to generate sales and generate interest. People before that would have been face-to-face. So it is problem solving, but in a generational way. It's massively important to stay ahead of the trends, to understand what's coming down the track. So TikTok, for example, is huge at the moment, but it's also understanding how the problems were solved using the technology of the day, so that I can always reverse back to using a telephone. Cold calling's never dead because you're connected with the person at the end of the line, but it's a generational thing.
Yeah, indeed. So I think that one could argue that the older generation has a greater, broader depth of skills potentially, if they've also adopted the new techniques as well.
Yeah, I agree. I've got a cough. That's been there since we started, but I've got it out now. So digital marketing is a creative industry. Mm-hmm. Where do the ideas come from? Do you have free rein at Intergage to just go off and find different avenues, or?
Well, our 10% learning time helps in that respect. So we've got, nearly 30 people who are constantly learning new things, which is and bringing them to the party, which is good. So where do new ideas come from? Collaboration is usually the way. We talked about new ideas and innovation. A lot of innovation is actually recombination. So you're looking at two existing technologies, and 1 + 1
that's
equals,
a soundbite we'll use.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there are only two different types. One article I was reading the other day said, it is recombination versus the mega leap, if you like, in terms of what's possible. So it's where you, for example, let's look at blog writing, for example. There's a great technology, and let's look at video making, and let's look at AI. Now, if what happens is you can use AI to combine videos and blogs, then what you can do is you can create a product that can read a blog and then fish out different clips of video, glue them together in the right order, pick out the right bits of the text, put them on top of the video, and pretty much present you with a made video from a blog. Yeah. And that was one of my favourite bits of technology that I've seen recently. It was like, that's recombination, right? And it's going, well, these technologies already exist, but let's just combine them in a slightly different way. Yeah, that's fantastic, as opposed to perhaps AI and machine learning itself. But even then, they build on each other. So,
where do you see the future of digital marketing? Because obviously we're in the social media world now and moving towards the stuff that you're talking about. But where's the future going?
Well, there will be an awful lot of automation. And one of the things I'd urge anybody who really wants to have a jaw-dropping experience to do is to go and have a look at Soul Machines and have a look at the way that those guys have built. How would you best describe it? Well, you are interacting on screen with an avatar that can read your expressions and can read over 100 micro expressions on your face, can do the same things themselves, and will actually start bonding with you because it will mirror your body language, it will mirror your emotions, and it's trying to make you like it. So that's
crazy.
It is, yeah. So there is going to be an awful lot of automation, and I think that some of the winners in the future were those people who really harness that automation to make human buyers feel comfortable with automation.
Do you think the Japanese are way ahead of that? Because I saw a documentary the other day where, and this is completely off-piste, but a Japanese guy was marrying an avatar because he was that connected to it. He was carrying it around in a jar and was watching this avatar female, and she would serve him and give him answers to things. So they'd created a bond and a relationship. But do you think the Japanese are way ahead in terms of developing technology, or is it the Western world is also just as capable?
Yeah, I don't think there's any. Yeah, I'm just trying to digest how sad that is that somebody could fall in love with an avatar and instead of a real human. I think that's really sad. But anyway, I think it's important to be flawed and to be a flawed human. That search for perfection is entirely sad. And I think going back to what we talked about earlier with our youth, it's a problem when they grow up in a social media world like that. So sorry, I've rambled a bit. What was the original question again?
Do you think the East or the West is winning or further ahead in terms of developing?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I think probably there's a conformity that goes with being in parts of the East. There are phrases like the nail that stands proud will be hammered down, which doesn't lend itself to a culture like that of going off on your own and being entrepreneurial and trying new things versus, obviously they corporately have a lot of technology and they have a government that's kind of allegedly endorses the theft of IP around the world. So, perhaps they don't have to be as good at technology if what happens is they're really good at stealing somebody else's.
Stealing it allegedly and then using that and repatriating it and recombinating it to become something. Yeah, I get
absolutely.
Your point. Yeah.
So, but I think perhaps we're in the West. If we're being stereotypical, one would say that we're encouraged to be more free thinking. Yeah. But are we achieving the same grades on average as there's people perhaps in some of these other areas of the world? No, we're probably not.
No. So Intergage is a local company in Dorset. How do you guys give back to the community?
Well, that's an interesting question. We focus on working with young people. So a lot of the work we do is through Dorset Chamber, for example, with a young chamber initiative. And what we do is we work with schools wherever that opportunity presents itself, and we can spare the capacity. We go out of our way to go to events that encourage young people to get into the digital industry, to understand the digital industry, and work out whether it's for them or not. We try and get involved in careers events. And we're particularly close to Poole High School, where I've recently taken up a role as a governor, as well as being a careers and enterprise company advisor, so that I can bring my business network into play. Yep. And I have some amazing people in my business network who go into Poole High School on a regular basis and work with those guys. Like everybody else, I guess we also have a charity of the year that we all contribute a day every year towards helping. Yep. And so we're currently building a website for Waggy Tales, and last year we worked with the My Time charity for young carers in Dorset.
Okay. So talking of days, this is that's a tenuous link, but you've just switched to 4-day working.
Yes, we have.
How's that going?
It's fine. I mean, it's I'd say it's better than fun. But in terms of my coffees with the boss, when I ask people what's working at Intergage, the vast majority of my team, the first thing they say is flexi time. You know, it's hugely important to them. And it's far more so than I ever thought it was going to be when we conceived the idea. And it was actually through working with some people at Bournemouth University, some young people there, that they made it really clear to me that flexi time is really important to them. And
so for the listeners of the podcast who don't know how it works, how does it work?
Well, basically what happens is that because most of our work is working on projects and contracts, and our guys, provided they fill out their timesheet, have complete flexibility as to when they do that work. We don't insist that they're in the office 5 days a week. We insist that everybody's in on a Tuesday and Thursday, so we can't go 2 days in a row without having a meeting if we need to. But other than that, we say that if they want to take, if they want to manage their time flexibly, it's up to them. So if they want to work 4 days a week, we reduce the contracts down from 37.5 to 36. So if you wanted to work, for example, 4 9-hour days, you could do that, and then you could have 3 days off. And you could, and that's really proved to be the single thing that delights the team more than anything else. That trust. If they're completing their timesheet accurately, then we can afford to let them be the grown-ups and manage their own time.
Was there anybody against it?
No, there was. It was pretty universally positive in feedback across the board. Really, the directors, managers, and staff. I think everybody could see the value in it. I think there were a few people that wondered whether we'd actually make that work in terms of, could we still be as productive? But the figures are showing us that we are as productive.
So you've got metrics to track how much you're generating and what the output has not dropped.
No, the output has not dropped at all. And the happiness factor has gone through the roof.
Yeah.
It makes it easier to recruit when people are looking at one employer versus another one, and one has flexible working, the other doesn't, then, for a lot of young people, that's a killer differentiator. For sure.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have flexi time working, but we do finish at 12:30 on a Friday, which is, again, it's clinched many a recruitment deal when people have to work till 5 o'clock on a Friday versus 12:30 on a Friday. The weekend starts early, so it's perfect for us.
Yeah, I completely get that.
What else did I have to ask you? What do you see as your biggest strength in running Intergage? And you already know what the follow-up question will be.
I think my biggest weakness is about to be asked as well. So what's my biggest strength? I think my biggest strength is probably, somebody once said the other day that the CEO should stand for Chief Energy Officer. I thought that was a really good thing. So I think the fact that I can join dots together and I can steer the company in terms of reinventing itself, we've had to do that a number of times. In order to stay current is probably a strength. The fact that I do that with a certain amount of integrity, and as much as I encourage complete transparency and honesty in the business at all times. Yeah. And I've recruited a team that believes in that. So I think that's probably my biggest strength.
And the follow-up?
And the follow-up is I'm not a great completer finisher. Like a lot of entrepreneurs, I'm better at coming up with ideas than I am of getting into the discipline of following through on them.
Does that make you good at? Because I identify with that as well. And we've had a previous guest on the podcast who joined a company when he was in his early or late teens, and then has now taken over as managing director. But he worked for an entrepreneur and suffered the same fate, that his boss never completed things, but it was down to him to do it. I come up with some fantastic ideas, and we're shifting the culture and the direction of the company. But my attention to detail, you can lift it up.
Okay. That's good. It's just my stomach's starting to rumble a little
Oh.
bit. Just think
If you just twist it down, because
Okay.
But my attention to detail was just not there. Sometimes I know what I want to achieve, but my greatest skill, I believe, is getting to people to do things without them thinking it's without them knowing that it's not their idea, it's my idea. It won't pick it up because this is only one directional, so you don't have to worry.
Okay, sorry, Matt.
That's all right.
Start again?
So my greatest skill, I believe, is that I'm able to get people to do things without them realising that it's not their idea. So I generate the idea within their head, and then they suddenly are bought into the idea. So I'm able to generate that enthusiasm and that direction through other people. So how do you overcome that weakness?
By working with people who are completer finishers.
Yes.
So, for example, I'm prone, as I'm sure most entrepreneurs are, in trying to squeeze one last thing in before I leave for a meeting. And so opposite me is a completer finisher called Hannah, who will be saying, Paul, you really have to be leaving now to get to that podcast interview on time.